All right. Good morning, Doug. Happy Monday. Today, I want to talk about something that's going on in the markets and also vaccine passports. We have seen some, basically there was a large hedge fund run by a guy named Bill Huang, who's a disciple of Julian, what's Julian's?
Julian Robertson.
Julian Robertson's, yes, Tiger Global. So anyway, he apparently took a huge position in a small number of companies, but he didn't take these positions by actually buying the stock. Instead, what he did is he bought some underlying financial instruments, essentially, something I'd never heard of before. He did buy some equity swaps, which I have heard of, but something called CFDs, which are contracts for difference. And this is a derivative I've never even heard of before. But he was able to accumulate huge amounts of stock in a few specific companies. And, then he started getting a bunch of margin calls on Friday, couldn't make them. And it caused the forced selling of huge blocks of things like Viacom and some others. And, whether or not this spills into the larger market, I don't know. I think it's hard to tell at this point, but I think this tells us something about the financialization that is going on in our markets. And I just want to get your take on how that's changed over time and what the implications of that are.
Well, the trillions of dollars that have been created by the US especially, but it's true of the Europeans and the Chinese, the Japanese, all these central banks seem to be working together to print up more money to keep the rotten financial structure from collapsing. And this money, while it's kept things from collapsing, has flowed into all kinds of gambling instruments. It's funny. The US has basically, a few years ago anyway, outlawed online poker. For what reasons, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe it was they're offshore entities and weren't paying, who knows what it was. So, and other types of online gambling. So you can't gamble per se online, but you can gamble all you want with all kinds of exotic instruments that most people, including myself, don't know what they're about. So it's really quite perverse, this Federal Reserve interventions having all kinds of consequences. So, all right, so this guy has, managed to apparently borrow a lot of money. That's why he's got margin calls and subject to forced selling to make bets on stocks, long, short, I don't know. Maybe he's got some kind of information. He's got an opinion on the market. But the trouble is the whole market today is like a daisy chain where somebody who nobody's ever heard of before has a lot of credit and leverages himself and defaults. And then the next guy has to default because he can't make his bets. And the next guy has to default. And that's the problem with an over-indebted, over-leveraged world. It's inherently unstable. It's unstable because of all the debt. And it's unstable because if the central banks don't keep printing up money to prop it up, it's all going to collapse. And a lot of people are going to lose things they thought they owned. So I remain just truly bearish about the financial and economic future.
So what do you think these complicated financial instruments, credit default swaps and mortgage-backed securities is what I remember from the last financial crisis. Those are a couple of things that popped up and caused some trouble. Where did these all come from? Like when was it, do you think, in the market, in the history of the market, that these things became such a predominant source of trading, and really where the actual game was being played was in these instruments through leverage or opacity of some kind, versus it being simply a supply and demand driven equity or bond market? Like, how long has it been that it's been this messed up through financialization?
Maybe this started really big time with the securitization of mortgages. And Michael Lewis, the financial author, wrote about this in one of his early books, where he talked about the fact that nobody thought they could securitize mortgages because when interest rates went down, the previous mortgagee would refinance at a lower rate. So, you know, who wanted to own mortgages on that basis? I mean, there was no upside, but it was done somehow, and I forget exactly how they did that. So I think that was one of the opening shots and things. And also, people forget that even back in the 70s, seems like well, it is a long time ago now. It seems like yesterday in some ways, but you could trade puts and calls on some stocks, but it was all over the counter, so that you had to have a broker who specialized in that type of thing and knew which trading desks to call that might be able to find you a, a put on McDonnell Douglas or something like that. And but today, I mean, the option markets are just gigantic and they're huge. So these are all relatively recent innovations. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, these are contracts between two willing individuals, but they're interesting because they show the tenor of the market. It's all about leverage. It's all about leverage.
Well, that's the thing. Is there any of these financial instruments that at the end of the day doesn't exist to provide you with leverage? It seems like that's the one commonality among all of them, right? That they're all leverage based.
Yeah, it is. And therefore, it's all about counterparty risk. Because if things get wild and crazy, how do you know you can trust the guy on the other side of the deal?
Right.
Or for that matter, even trust the broker or the exchange that somebody's going to make good on it. I mean, if it's a real tidal wave that comes in, all this stuff will be washed away. And in addition to that, you know, over the last 10 years, I think it's impossible to get a stock certificate of a stock that you own. All that you have is a computer printout from a brokerage firm. Well, okay, I understand the convenience of that. But at the same time, it's just, digits can get wiped off a computer screen a lot easier than a certificate in your safe deposit box will vanish, number one. And when people took delivery of stocks, bought stocks with stock certificates, it meant that they were planning on holding them for a while. But stocks have all become hot potatoes today. And in addition to that, even though the public is kind of wild and crazy and getting very involved in the stock market, something we found with that with GameStop,
Yep.
that the fact is the market itself is highly institutionalized now. It's all about ETFs and hedge funds and pension funds. And just the average guy looking out for himself doesn't buy individual stocks anymore. In fact, this is why most of the newsletters that are out there that I've seen don't do real securities analysis. In fact, they barely identify the stock at all, other than by its trading symbol, not like the name of the corporation, which might be helpful. So it's, and everybody thinks that this is like the new normal. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll find out.
It all feels like abstractions of abstractions to me, because things like, as a guy who started a lot of businesses, and any money that I made from the cash flow those businesses actually produced, and my stake in those businesses is how I got financial security. So if you take that and you extrapolate that to where it's supposed to work, you would imagine in the public markets is, you have Buffett buying Coca-Cola in 1990 or 92, and for the dividends, and then, now he earns more in dividends each year than his principal. And that seems like, and the stock ownership is a claim on those earnings of that corporation. But now it's the profit motive around owning a share in a company seems like it's a lot more related just to simply that, the greater fool theory of some kind, that it's just going to go up in value, and the interest in the underlying company is almost irrelevant, and their earnings and their balance sheet is pretty much irrelevant. And then you layer on top of that all these, you know, basic derivatives like puts and calls, and then then you got these, what do they call them, contracts for difference. And anyway, it just seems like it's, and then you don't even own the shares at all. And then there are more ETFs than there are stocks, which seems weird. And it's
Well,
like,
is that an actual fact? How many ETFs are there, by the way?
let me see if I can find out quickly, but I have heard several times that there are actually more of them than there are actual stocks. Let me see how good Google is here. And yes, in 2020, there are 7,602 ETFs globally.
Yeah, that must be significantly more than the stocks traded on the New York Stock Exchange.
Yes, and it's gone. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, compared to 2008, there were 1,620. 2008, there's 1,620. Now there's 7,602.
Yeah, people think this is great. And of course, it can be convenient for speculators, but people forget that those ETFs are only put together, and it costs money to put them together, but they're only put together because the promoter is collecting fees.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it costs you money to own an ETF. It doesn't cost you money to own the individual stock. But if you own the individual stock, well, then you've got to do some research. So,
right, and really, who cares about that? I mean, all we need to know is like what Elliott wave the stock is in right now, right? Isn't that those sorts of technical analysis is about the only thing that matters?
it's true. Following the lines on a chart is what everybody seems to do today. I like looking at charts because it gives me perspective on where the price of the stock has been and whether it seems to be in an uptrend or a downtrend. It's helpful to know. But this is reading tea leaves the way people read things into charts.
Yes, yeah. It's sometimes people believe in it as much as they can believe in the entrails of a recently sacrificed rooster. Seems a little ridiculous sometimes.
And it all relates to the fact that the volume of stocks traded has gone up hyperbolically. I mean, it wasn't so long ago, well, maybe it was, that when I started buying and selling stocks, an average day of trading on the New York Stock Exchange was 10, 15 million shares, and it went up to 40 million. And now I don't even know what it is. It's in the hundreds of millions because it's all artificial intelligence driven computer trading, where it's important for these people to be 100 yards closer to the floor because their order will get there a nanosecond sooner. This is bizarre. This is all crazy. This is wasted motion. It's more signs of instability in the market.
And this is one of the biggest worries about, is if you try and approach the stock market from the Benjamin Graham intelligent investor approach, it's great because it does force you to look at an actual company and company balance sheet and actually do an analysis of an individual company. But within that company, the backdrop that company is in is just so synthetic and complex that I wonder if it even matters at all anymore. You could do great securities analysis. You could buy a great company. It could have great earnings, but it certainly doesn't guarantee you success in investing. It just seems like a giant fraud to me, I mean, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're going to have to see what happens. And, as the saying goes, this is not going to end well. It's just not going to end well. So I'm kind of glad I'm in the middle of nowhere down here in Uruguay.
Yeah. Well, but one thing I want to mention about these markets real quick is just that one of the big things that attracted me to the Bitcoin market and the cryptocurrency market back in 2016 was that it felt like, despite its incredible volatility, and the fact that there was the volume could be relatively low, and like I said, there lots of volatility, it seemed like an honest market, meaning that there weren't, you couldn't really borrow shares to sell short. You couldn't really, there were no, contracts for difference created around it yet, no CDSs, none of that. So it just seemed like it was, although volatile, it was honest. Is that true, do you think, or no?
Yeah. I do. I mean, the whole world is it's just over financialized. That's all there is to it. And it used to be, when they started out, stock markets were means buyer meet seller, make trade, go back to your regular business. It's not like that today, where well, things always change and evolve. And yes, I understand that, but the markets, other than allowing buyers to meet seller and financing businesses, they really don't serve much of a purpose. So they're really gambling casinos today. As a laissez-faire anarcho-capitalist, I hate to say something like that. It sounds like the type of thing that a socialist that wants to abolish markets would say. But it's just a factual matter, because the markets have been so corrupted by all this money that's floating around. And of course, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, it has a budget of, I think, about a couple $2 billion per year. And it's got, I don't know how many thousands of people working for it, mostly lawyers that are, after they serve their time and get to know people, permanent bureaucrats, move into law firms to, collect 6-figure and 7-figure salaries, regulating the markets. I mean, I hope the SEC is abolished too. Well, look, by the time the bottom comes, the average guy isn't going to care what the market does. In fact, he's not even going to know that the market exists. I don't know how long in the future that's going to be, but that's the way it's going to be, I think.
Got it. I agree. Okay. So second topic I want to talk to you about is vaccine passports. Now there has been, it almost seems like as a marketing guy, it seems like the last week has been almost a global rollout of a PR campaign about vaccine passports. I mean, we had the, European Union come out and talk about that, for summer travel to return to normal, here's this vaccine passport we could use. You have, Boris over in the UK saying, we're probably use these for pub access, these vaccine passports just to be able to access certain private businesses and that, help things get back to normal. Then you have New York launching their own, which, gives you access to certain venues like just major sports venues and so forth. And then yesterday there was a Washington Post article that came out, which was probably the most, thorough one I've seen, describing what's happening in the federal level in the US. And it's clear that this is going to be coming. I mean, that there's an attempt to push this out on everybody. And I think regardless of how you feel about this particular vaccine, any particular vaccine, the idea of this is terrifying, because the parameters by which they control access to things of everybody the ability to do that will stay forever. And parameters could easily change. And so the social credit score thing can easily be put in there. It's frightening, and it's coming. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, it's actually terrifying. It's one of the final nails in the coffin of individual freedom in the US. To start with, from a strictly technical point of view, which vaccines are going to be approved for your passport? Well, it's hard to believe that passport, maybe it'll be a laminated card to start with, but the passport will definitely wind up with a chip put under your skin. And people will approve it because it'll be with them all the time. It'll be easy to, not carry another piece of paper around with you. So the public will love it. So it's going to go to a chip. And of course, once it's a chip, you can put anything and everything on a chip. And of course, people say, hey, that's really convenient. I've always got my ID with me too. Well, I really don't believe in IDs, but now this is very bad news. And another technical question I ask myself is, which vaccine? The Cubans are supposed to, of all people, I mean, on my trips to Cuba, one was like a semi-state sponsored thing. And Cuba's famous for its medical system. And I visited these labs, and they were like nothing more than what a US high school would have. I thought it was rather embarrassing, but they thought these were like the crown jewels in their medical system. So they say that they've developed not one, but 2 vaccines. So can I get the Cuban vaccine? Okay, the Russians have a vaccine. How about that? Will that be accepted? Chinese have a vaccine. I don't know who's going to have vaccines. How many more companies that'll be different? So how are they going to approve which vaccines?
Yeah,
But I don't want a vaccine, quite frankly. They're experimental, they're dangerous. There's just too many problems.
well, my
Apart from the fact that I think that COVID itself is largely a hysteria. Yeah, you don't want to get it. You don't want to get any kind of a virus, flu virus. That goes without saying. But this is a real problem. I mean, if I want to travel somewhere next year, by next year this time, I'm going to have to show some kind of proof of vaccination. Well, I guess I'll have to make a choice or find somebody that will give me proof without the vaccination. There's going to be, the room for corruption here is going to be immense with people paying off people to.
Yep. One of the things I think is, Doug, is that, a lot of, I posted something about this in our Telegram channel, and there was a lot of pushback. People, first of all, saying, oh, you're just like, you're just sort of doom forecasting, talking about bad things coming and not, there's no solutions to it. You're just going to.
It's true. It's true. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, the other thing that is a lot of people actually don't believe this is coming, or that they're going to, or that it's actually going to be as dominant of a thing as I think it will be. And I think you think it will be too. So, because they're like, well, how, like the government can't do this. They can't do it. And this is what people are saying. And my view is, well, the government can do anything that they want, but even more than that, as long as if the people will voluntarily comply with any government mandate, then that's how it works. And in the US in particular, it seems to me that it comes through private companies. That's the exact way this mask thing went. For the most part, whenever any elected leader made a mask mandate, it was already being done and demanded by private companies. The airlines demanded it long before the FAA said it was a requirement. Walmart made masks a requirement long before, in any state, and even when states that don't have it as a mask mandate, now you still have to, their policies, you have to have a mask in there. So it's led by these private companies, and these public-private partnerships, it kind of gives everybody cover to work together on it. And and if you think that won't happen with the vaccine passport, then two points. Number one, Walmart is one of the issuing bodies of this vaccine passport. It's a place where you can go and get the vaccine, and they can issue your passport. Okay. And they're using, I believe, the Common Pass app, which is created in partnership with the Global Economic Forum. I'm pretty sure they're using that one, but they're even issuing it. So why do you think that Walmart, who has mandated masks, which they sold, that mandated masks used in their store, is not going to mandate, that you get a green check mark before you go in their store? And of course, I know there are other stores, but like, this is just how this scales out. United Airlines, American Airlines have already announced that they're doing this. Most major airlines in the world have announced that this is happening. It'll be on domestic travel, not just international travel. And the US government can sit on the sidelines for a long time, and this still be rolled out completely.
It's actually Mussolini's wet dream has been given reality on a grand scale. This is what fascism is all about. I mean, it's about the cooperation between the state and corporations. It's corporatism. So yeah, it's definitely here. It used to be, this is a big mistake that Ayn Rand made. She always thought that businessmen were heroes and creators, and it was the little bed bugs that worked for the government that were the problem. But the fact is that we live in a fascist state where the two of them cooperate together to mutual benefit. So I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon either. And along those lines, it annoys me when people say communist China, when they're talking about China. China is not a communist country at all. Its economic system is very, very similar to that we have here in the US or in Europe. The Communist Party is a scam that runs China. Yeah, right. Just as the Democratic Party is going to run the US in the years to come. But it's all fascism, economic fascism. So yeah, you're quite correct.
Well, I'm gonna link to this article in the Washington Post and encourage people to read it, because it's very enlightening about what their plans are. And one of the things it says is that just talking about, the internal deliberations at the White House is, that some of the concerns are the best. Let's see, they're deliberating how best to track the shots and avoid the perception of a government mandate to be vaccinated. So they're trying. It's a priority to avoid the perception of a government mandate.
It's cute. What does a shot cost? People that get them now in the U.S., are they free, or do you pay for them, or what happens?
I don't know. I'm under the impression, though, that they are low cost to no cost, that they've been federally subsidized. That's my impression.
So, gee, it'd be good to find out exactly what the case is. Because, of course, when you want to be tested for COVID, it costs in between $100 and $150. And if you want to fly internationally, you have to pay that. And you have to wait 3 days for it to come back and hope it comes back in time and it's accepted on the other end and so forth. So will getting the shot, which is free, paid for by the government, I'd like to know exactly how that works. It didn't talk about that in the WAPO article, did it?
No, I did not talk about the cost, but they do talk about the idea that, that they're worried that, okay, so I'll just read one other line to you. It says, they want to make sure all Americans will be able to get credentials that prove they have been vaccinated, but also want to set up systems that are not easily hacked or passports that cannot be counterfeited, given that forgeries are already starting to appear. So, yeah, and they mentioned something about healthcare equity, making sure that everybody's able to get it, so that essentially the costs are cheap enough that that's not the limiting factor.
Yeah, that means the government will pay for it because, a poor person that's driving a car might have to pay a $500 speeding ticket, but yeah, of course.
The shots free. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, shots free.
The thing is,
this is bad news, and it's unclear to me what the way out of this is. I mean, as you pointed out early on, there's going to be counterfeiting and bribery, but as systems get better, that's going to get harder and harder. So you either play the game or you don't travel. So it's a decision we'll probably all have to make.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, it seems like it's going to be happening. It's international travel is not going to be the tip of the spear. I mean, we see the use of these things to, as Boris was saying in the UK, to go see pubs or to go to pubs. It was going to be part of it. You see, to attend an event at Madison Square Garden in New York. New York has just unveiled this Excelsior Pass, is what they call it, and it'll that is going to cover major venues like that, with adding smaller venues in other public areas after. That's released April 1st. So, I mean, I don't even know if I think Focus Passport almost like deceptive in that we think that it's for travel, and it's not just going to be for travel. It's going to be for just going about your business.
Yeah, well, it makes me feel like a dinosaur because look, all the young people are indoctrinated about the importance of this. They'll get into it enthusiastically, so they'll hardly be inconvenienced. It's just going to be people of a certain age that will resist, but the passage of time will solve that problem. So, God, we really are moving into something in between Huxley's Brave New World and Orwell's 1984. It's actually happening. It's actually quite shocking. It's actually mildly amusing. I mean, if you're prone to be amused by stupidity.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think one of the things that is not to just be a doom forecaster, like you have to recognize exactly what you're up against in order to try and do something. So a big part of what we have been trying to do here is to just help people understand the extent to which this all is, so that because if you don't, then you're liable to make mild compromises to, that if anyone asked you, in the very beginning, would you be willing to do X? Would you be willing to, have to be chipped and tracked wherever you go and doing whatever you do? Everybody's going to say no. But if you don't, and if you don't recognize that that's where it's going, then you're not likely to say no to these earlier steps that are happening. And I think the slippery slope just becomes really deep. So I think there's value in us talking about this doom forecasting a little bit, but there are solutions. One of the things on this Thursday, we have Paul Rosenberg joining us, who is a solutions-oriented guy, and he's got this concept called the parallel society, which I think might offer some ideas for what people could do. Yeah, there's some doom, no doubt about this, but it can be funny if you think about it, just in how dumb people are. And one of the examples of that, and one of the problems with people trying to resist these vaccine passports, is the fact that they're right now in the U.S., 136 million doses of these gene therapies or vaccines have been given at this point. 136 million doses. Almost 50 million people are fully vaccinated in the U.S. right now. So there's a huge constituency that almost have so as not to have cognitive dissonance, is going to believe that these sorts of things are a good thing. That these sorts of tracking things are a good thing.
Yeah, well, resistance is futile, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't resist.
I agree. And I think at the end of the day, our system is entirely built on voluntary compliance. It really is. It's not, we all just there's not like, there's not like major resistance movements for masks or anything like that. And, and the state cracking down on them, at least not in the US. Instead, it's just people just like going, okay, well, I guess I'll just do it.
Well, it's like the income tax. It's built on voluntary compliance, and everybody acts like a whipped dog and rolls over and wets themselves. And if they see somebody that's not doing it, they transform themselves into a rat and go to squeal to the authorities on somebody that's not playing the game. So anyway, resistance is futile, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't resist.
Are there any thoughts that you have for how one might resist the things that are coming, things that are here now?
It's a problem because they won't let you on the plane unless you have something that, well, you can fly private, but that's about 10 times more expensive than flying commercial, 10 times or more. So that's an alternative, but not a practical alternative for most people. Within the US, you can drive as opposed to fly. I mean, yeah, you can work around it, but it's going to be inconvenient.
It's going to be inconvenient. I'm going to take on that inconvenience, though, Doug. I have to say, I'm just not into it. But
no, I'm not into it either. I've just never seen myself as a whipped dog. I'm sorry. I just can't live with that self-image. And I'm just ashamed that the average American, this is such bullshit. Land of the free and the home of the brave. I mean, this is nonsense. They've got to cut those lines out of the national anthem.
Well, I think they're going to cut the national anthem. I mean, aren't they doing it there? Isn't there like a competing national anthem they do ahead of most sporting events?
Well, you know what? Maybe that's true. Yeah. Now there's big changes on the way. It's just, well, I wonder if they'll make the movie V for Vendetta illegal. They're certainly not going to be playing it on the big screen anymore, because that was a story with a happy ending. But unfortunately, not terribly realistic.
No, but it eventually showed that the whole thing, even in the where the government controlled everything in that movie, voluntary non-compliance, and it all falls apart. I mean, that's just the way it all works. And I don't know how you get that, but mass voluntary non-compliance is required for there to be any change, or to stop the status policies that are coming. That's the only way out.
Well, all we can do is our individual parts, so that at least we'll be able to live with ourselves. even though it'll be very hard to live with all these other chimpanzees out there.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about was we talked a little bit about these inflation last week, and specifically relating to used cars, just because it's one kind of objective barometer of, you know, an actual market and how prices have actually changed, and it's very well measured. And the overall cost of used cars in the last year, basically March of last year to March of this year, is up over, it's I believe 26%. I think it was the number, 26% year over year, which is just a shocking increase in the cost of used vehicles. But within that was a class of vehicle that was even much higher than that, and that was pickup trucks. The pickup trucks are 43% year over year. Like, how is that even possible in a market that something like that can jump that much? It doesn't make any sense to me.
As a lifelong car guy, I can't figure it out, quite frankly. I just can't figure it out. I mean, well, first of all, I can't figure out why anybody would want to drive a pickup truck as opposed to a regular car, unless they're hauling stuff in the flatbed, which almost nobody does that drives a pickup unless they're in the construction business or a farm or something like that. So this is all a mystery to me.
Well,
And of course, but maybe, you know, I think new pickup trucks, you can pay 50 or 60 grand for a new pickup truck easily if you get one that's loaded, I think.
yeah, no, you're right. I remember, boy, it must have been 5 years ago now or so. Bill Bonner wrote an amazing essay, because he's had a pickup truck for a long time. He drives them for a long time and then gets a new one. And he's comparing essentially the cost of one that he bought 30 years ago versus the cost of a new one that he bought about 5 years ago. And, you know, and of course, according to the people that publish the statistics on inflation in the country, the cost of the vehicle was down. Actually, it was or stable from over the last 30 years. But in fact, it was like, to keep rough numbers from memory, paid like 5 grand for a pickup a long time ago, and then it was 40 grand 5 years ago. You know, and it's just like the basic F-150, you know, that it's been made for years. And so the cost of these things has gone up dramatically over that period of time anyway. But for these used prices to spike like this, I don't know. It's just very, very, very strange. There's something wrong with market. And I think it definitely indicates there is some inflation out there.
Well, Auto Week magazine did an article that I read last week comparing a stripped down but entirely adequate car that can be bought in China. You know, adequate performance, 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. Adequate. It was adequate in all days. Four-door coupe. You could buy it for about $10,000 or $11,000 brand new. You know, with basic equipment, a radio, things of that nature, no problem. Air conditioning. And the closest equivalent that we have in the US is something like basically the same car is $25,000 because of the airbags and because of God knows what else is added on. It's government mandates. So there you have it. But I can own any kind of car that I want. And I'm not into cars so much anymore because, you know, speeding in the old days was one thing, and you get a fine. But now speeding is really, really serious. So you don't want to do it. And the police have all kinds of devices to pick you up. And if you get a new car, you can be tracked absolutely everywhere. So I'm not as interested. And the roads are crowded, and you know, it's
Great joy.
and you know, I don't know. Do I want a new Ferrari? What am I going to do with it? Anyway, most people that buy Ferraris and such today use them as collectibles.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, it's true. Well, the great joy of driving has definitely been stripped away. And you're right. I mean, if you're going, depending upon the area you're in, if you're going, you know, 20 or 30 miles an hour over the speed limit, in some places, that's not an unreasonable thing, actually. You could lose your license immediately. It could be revoked for a year for that, because it's considered reckless driving. And you know, something I didn't realize actually until the other day was that the whole idea of these speed limits and all uniformly across America was part of the oil embargo in the 70s. But after that, that the feds basically mandated that there be speed limits on all roads, and what the highways was 55 in order to save on fuel. And it basically gave, but there are many places in the United States where you find roads that had no speed limit still, at that time, until the feds got involved with it. I had no idea that was the case.
Hmm. Well, yeah. More cops. And of course, we'll need more cops in the future. In fact, haven't I read that they're going to hire a whole bunch more cops? But they're mainly going to be traffic cops, I think, or rule enforcing cops, as opposed to cops that are actually there if you suffer a home invasion. And I wonder, after they illegalize guns, if home invasions are going to go up.
Almost guaranteed, seems to me. If you take all the risk out of it, it's got to be, you would imagine they would go up.
Yeah, especially if you're a rich person, perceived as, and the local factory people have all lost their jobs and they're unhappy, and they're really going to feel that these rich people must be to blame. They got more money, I got less. There's something wrong, and one thing leads to another. It gets out of control. More gloom and doom. I'm sorry, it always keeps going down the same place in the funnel. I'm sorry, listeners, but I'd be happy if somebody should ask some questions, or perhaps write us an essay showing how we're wrong being gloomy about this. Not about the fact that technology is continuing to develop, although there's no guarantees that that'll continue either. But I'd like some counterpoint.
Yeah. Well, Doug, are you as gloomy on your view of your personal life, and your personal future? Are you as gloomy on that as you are on the state of the changes in the world?
Well, look, the older you get, the more you realize that it's hard to change things. And as you know, one of the few laws that I recognize is the second law of thermodynamics, which says that everything winds down and falls apart, including the human body. So, but that doesn't mean I'm gloomy. It just means that I recognize that that's the way the world works. But the world is changing. It is changing. I mean, it's always had people that have criminal personalities. They've been with us since day one. But the thing is the state in the past wasn't the overweening institution that it is today. So you had criminals out there. Okay, fine. But if they went to work for the king, I mean, the king didn't have the kind of control that the governments do today. So yeah, they were dangerous and they were criminals, but not as dangerous as they are today, because they hadn't been legitimized by the government. So my personal life, I'm affected by all these things, but no, no, not really. How about you?
Yeah, me too. I mean, me too. I think I can separate the difference between what I expect is happening in the world and what I believe is in my control to shape a life for me and my family and the people that I care about that can still be rich and rewarding, although taking on major inconveniences, having to, realizing that my time of international travel is, I have to assume, gone. Not to say there won't be some international travel, but I have to assume that I have to be grateful for the fact that I've been able to travel a lot, and be open to the idea that I might never cross international borders again. Like, I just have to be okay with that and still try and find a way to create something useful in the world for me, my family, and the people that I care about. I think I can.
Yeah, I mean, it could be worse. I mean, it's not like we're in Berlin in 1945. So, things are still, relatively speaking, pretty good.
And those people that were, the people that, the people that were in Berlin before the war started, like they were, like if they would have seen some of it coming, if they would have assumed the worst, if they would have anticipated, they would have seen the writing on the wall. They could have made some small changes in their personal lives. They could have still set themselves up, themselves and their family and the people they care about for a rich and rewarding life still. Like there was, only by recognizing the shitstorm that was coming was that possible.
Yeah. They could have, for instance, moved out of Germany. That would have been a pretty good idea.
And for those that did, it certainly helped.
Yeah, it did.
So that's the reason for the doomcasting is if you don't recognize the tsunami that's coming your way, then you're just going to get washed away by it. But if you see it coming, you can make some moves to some high ground and find yourself in a better situation.
But on the bright side, life will go on 100 years from now, even 1,000. Be interesting to be able to look back from that perspective. And maybe Ray Kurzweil is right. And we'll discover the secret to eternal youth and longevity.
Yeah, maybe he is. Okay. And so I said on Thursday, we are talking to Paul Rosenberg, who's got definitely a positive take, a very optimistic guy, and, but recognizes all the difficulties we're facing. So he'll be with us on Thursday. I hope people join us for that. And in the meantime, as Doug said, if you guys have a counterpoint to what we might be missing, and why, why our doom casting here is like totally overblown, we'd love to hear it, love to hear it. So please, in the comments or on the Telegram channel, tell us, and I'll bring it as a topic here for Doug and I to discuss. So please send it our way. And in the meantime, thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Great, Matt. Thanks.